Vielen Dank, da machen wir uns schon bereit für den ersten Vortrag. Man könnte sagen, er ist extra aus Serbien gekommen, ich nenne ihn mal Meister der Trainingsvorbereitung. Er wollte mir das nicht so ganz bestätigen, dass er das ist. Gestern Abend, als wir gesprochen haben, ich nenne ihn trotzdem mal so nach allem, was ich über ihn gelesen habe. Er selber kommt vor allem aus dem Kampfsport, hat aber auch schon Basketballer trainiert, Volleyballer trainiert, Fußballer trainiert, also wirklich allumfassend, ist in allen Sportarten ziemlich drin und daneben, das werdet ihr auch an seiner Statur sehen, sich mit Kraft- und Konditionstraining befasst. Ein Sportwissenschaftler, der sich über Trainingsvorbereitung bis zur Planung, Periodisierung und die ganze Theorie dahinter mit dem allen befasst, was ich sehr spannend finde und so auch noch nie gehört habe. Er hat mir das gestern ein bisschen erklärt, was heute auf uns zukommt. Sein Ansatz ist so, er bedient sich dem IT-Projektmanagement, schaut sich dort an, was machen die dort und versucht das in den Sport rein zu übertragen. Da geht es zum Beispiel darum, wie mache ich denn eine sinnvolle Tagesstruktur oder wie visualisiere ich gewisse Dinge, Verletzungsdauern, Kaderplanungen, Trainingsplanungen und so weiter. Und er hat mir gestern schon gesagt, ganz viele arbeiten schon so im Basketball, es ist ihnen vielleicht nur noch gar nicht so bewusst und das kann man sozusagen noch ein bisschen weiter professionalisieren und den Leuten bewusster machen. Ich freue mich sehr auf den ersten Vortrag, die Keynote von Mladen Jovanovic.
Hello. Thanks for the invitation. I need to set the timer because I tend to get too much involved in the topic. So anyway, one more time, thanks for the invitation and opportunity to talk about this. You guys are working in a club, so most of the stuff that I'm going to present today, you're probably already implementing, maybe questioning some of the stuff that's being taught at the academies and in the schools. So. Again, this is a work over the last few years that I tried to create a framework of planning which is a little bit different than the contemporary planning that we've been taught in school, and that we pretty much most of us felt that it's incapable of adapting to the scenarios that we have in elite sports. So pretty much the whole topic of today is that we can learn from other organizations and other domains that struggle with the similar problems. So accidentally, you are browsing the Amazon and the Amazon suggests few books for you, right? So I started kind of exploring some of the books that are outside of performance domain. So I have a programming background, so I read a little bit about the programming and the IT and so forth. So I stumbled by accident or so on these two books, and particularly the red one, the Scrum book, that explains this idea of the agile project management. And as I read the book, I saw that immediate application in how we apply and how we prescribe training in the sport domain. And in this presentation, I'm going to try to cover some of the implementation that I can see that they're most impactful, that we can actually implement immediately. Again, it's a 30-35 minutes presentation. I'm not going to be able to cover everything that I want. So hopefully this is going to motivate you to kind of dig a bit deeper into the literature and the concept of the agile planning and agile periodization. So anyway, this is something that's called a Cynefin or Cynefin, I think it's a Scottish or Welsh actually word, from Dave Snowden, trying to classify certain domains of project management. So generally, the idea of this model is that not all project management is applicable to all domains. We'll be mostly dealing with a complicated domain, but generally my talk today is about that some of the planning that we actually do, or some of the planning that we've been taught in school is ill defined for using, particularly in the complex domain that we deal with. Again, not everything that we deal with in a sports is a complex domain. We have a bunch of stuff in other quadrants, but eventually we need to figure out that some of the planning approaches that we are using are ill advised to be used. And you probably noticed that already. So pretty much the periodization ideas and planning that we have in sports so far, and you probably, as I said, have a gut feeling and maybe you're already using some of the novel ideas, come from a pretty much industrial revolution. Something called a scientific management or Taylorism. And if you're reading Bompa and on the Russian text, pretty much everything from that literature is kind of very, very affected by the industrial revolution and the ideas from the industrial management. And John Kiley is one of the Irish strength conditioning coaches who did an outstanding job in kind of pinpointing to those relationships. And if you have time, I highly suggest checking some of his writings. So anyway, this is one example of an annual plan made by myself somewhere around 2008. This is a volleyball club in Serbia, and I made this plan actually before seeing the athletes, before seeing I actually knew the competition calendar. I followed all the recommendations from Tudor Bompa, Verhoshansky, Surin, and created this block periodization that looks really nice, right? Looks really scientific. And I made this before seeing the athletes, before seeing the facilities, and so forth. So I only had the competition calendar in mind. So unfortunately or fortunately, most of this wasn't being done. So pretty much I can just throw it in a bin. So this is an example of something that's called a waterfall planning. That's quite common. So we spend a bunch of time creating a plan and just going down with the plan. So this is an example of this waterfall method that's quite common. And it seems to be working in certain domains. So coming back to that quadrants, this seems to be working in obvious and simple domains. For example, building a house or building something that's quite simple, and the cause and effect is understandable. So following this, the expert method, the best practices works in certain domains. And again, some of these planning elements work in our domain, but in some it doesn't. So this is a problem with the waterfall planning. I'm not going to read much, but so the uncertainty is the highest at the beginning, so we tend to overplan, we plan into details. Usually at the faculty where I finished in Belgrade, we had, in some of the classes, we need to create an annual plan very precisely, from pretty much every microcycle what's going to be done to every session. So that's the example of the overplanning. So we have this false sense of security that we're going to be able to deliver that plan as written. So we have all been going through the Corona pandemic, right? No one can predict that, and so that's one of the examples that how some uncertainties affect the plans. And again, here you can see that this waterfall is actually useful in some of the domains. The question is is the team sports or professional sports such a domain? So in my opinion, it's not, and you probably noticed that yourself. So we have a bunch of problems. Some of the key players might get injured. We might have political situations, travel problems, travel issues, equipment failure, and so forth. So what are the potential solutions? Again, I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm just going to stimulate you to kind of look forward to explore a bit more into the concept of the agile project management. So one of the solutions is to using iterative approach to planning. I'm going to demonstrate that. Adapting the MVP, or most viable product, or most viable performance concept. Avoiding over-planning. Although we do think that if you have a big plan, then you're a good coach. If you don't have any plan, then you are a bad coach. And particularly this idea of the explore-exploit, which I think it's one of the crucial elements in planning. The embedded testing, rapid feedback, and the novel concept of the robust planning. So these are some of the stuff I'm going to cover. So this is an example of the iterative planning. So rather than having a big chunk of a plan at the beginning, we have as much as needed plan at the beginning. Then we kind of deliver and plan intertwined. So rather than having a big plan and then we just deliver the plan, we plan as we go, pretty much. So in the Agile methodology, these cycles are called sprints, without referencing to the actual sprinting. So the sprints are time frames in the Scrum Agile methodology, which are fixed, usually 1 to 3 weeks, and the cycle repeats. So again, even with the Agile methodology, there are different schools or different implementations. So Scrum is one of the most common one used in a software development. So if you're building a software, usually you want to have something that you can demonstrate to a client after every sprint. So you start with a certain tasks or what they call the user stories. You develop that, you test, review, and then you're able to demonstrate that to the user. You collect the feedback, and then you continue. So this seems to be working with the IT domain, and again, I think it can be quite applicable in elite sports, or pretty much sport planning. And the second important aspect is this idea of the explore versus exploit. So let's assume that I'm a novel coach coming into a new club. Could be a head coach, could be a strength conditioning coach. And as you can see from the initial slide, I immediately created a big plan without actually seeing the athletes. So I think I immediately jumped to trying to exploit creating a plan, and then I kind of implement it. But rather than doing that, I think we need to have some time to kind of actually explore the system. You need to see who you're dealing with, what type of a culture there is, what type of athletes are you dealing with. And then once we kind of explore or sense the situation, then we try to exploit it. So we might have these phases very distinctive, or we can have them intertwined in an iterative manner. So we're always kind of exploring and exploiting. And if you're reading literature on the, say, motor learning, these concepts are actually also implemented there. So you allow the athletes to kind of explore the constraints and things like that. Once they figure out certain techniques or certain tactical patterns, you try to exploit that. So they might be exploring certain different technical elements. And once you kind of figure out what kind of works, then you try to exploit it. So again, these, I would call it complementary pair. They are really, really important and implemented in various elements of sport performance. So from the planning to actually skill acquisition, skill performance. So one example I'm going to give from the something that's called A/B testing. And it's very, very applied to business, but also in planning of the performance. So A/B testing comes from the IT also, again. So let's say I want to, I'm the owner of a certain website and I want to increase my income, right? I want to make sure that people buy certain product. So I might be wondering, okay, so if, how big should the buy this item button be? So it might be blue, might be red, might be things like that, I don't know. So I might actually ask an expert, say, okay, we're going to make it red and certain fonts. Or I might have something that's called A/B testing. So I'm going to randomize the users that are coming to my site. And one user is going to be shown one type of a button. Certain users are going to be shown another type of a button. And after a certain amount of time, I'm going to decide which variation, in this case C, is the most applicable one. So that's, again, example of the research in practice. So we need to spend time researching, and then after we decide which is the best strategy, we implement it. The problem with this, for example, let's say I come in a basketball club and I say, we're going to split the team, one part is going to do this, and then we're going to decide. The head coach and the owner is going to think I'm crazy because we don't want to lose time, in this case, users. So these users probably didn't buy the product because I spent time exploring. And again, only here, I only exploited. So in the IT industry, they develop something that's called multi-arm bandit. So kind of system learns. So if the system figures out the more individuals going to prefer the option C, it's going to increase the likelihood of visitors coming to the website seeing actually option C. So that's called something, the algorithm used there is called multi-arm bandit testing. So again, this kind of combines explore and exploit into a system. So the problem with this, again, even if it's beta, it could be, for example, if at Christmas time, people might prefer, red color scheme. And if it's a summertime, it could be something else. Or we might have, for example, if it's a Christmas time of year and the visitors coming to a website, there might be, Christians, might be Muslims, and so forth. So we don't actually know. So we also create something that's called a contextual bandit. So we collect the data based on the individual. Then we figure out the best option for that individual. So again, it's always explore, exploit. We never know what's going to work for someone. So even if you take for example, research that's available in, say, rehab or conditioning, certain athletes might be responding to that, certain athletes might not respond to that. So we always need to explore. Once we figure out, then we exploit it. The next concept is the concept of the minimum viable performance. MVP, it's not most valuable player, but it's very, very similar. So minimum viable program or minimum viable performance is a training plan that in my opinion, it's a most robust planning aspect. So we're making sure that we're using minimum viable methods. So we are not experimenting crazy. We are using, what seems to be working most of the time. We just want to cover all the bases most of the time. That's the safest option. For example, in Serbia, in one preseason, we had one coach who invested a large portion of the preseason into building aerobic capacity of the athletes, because the textbooks say so. You need to build a base. I'm talking about the soccer or football. Unfortunately, the athletes did put all eggs in one bin in this case, so only doing a lot of extensive conditioning, no sprints, no dual actions, things like that. And we also had friendly games during that period. So the performance, again, wasn't minimum viable performance. It was, down the drain. So we lost multiple friendly games. So even if his approach was working, in the long run, he got fired because he lost 3 friendly games in a row. And it wasn't really good for the team, atmosphere or what have you. So in that case, we need to use minimum viable methods, and we want to make sure that we cover all bases as much as possible, pretty much all the time. So we always need to have a thread of everything in our program. So we cannot afford to, risk putting all the eggs in a wrong basket. So again, this is a graphical example of the idea. What you have in the top 2 rows is the example of what the minimum viable product is. So you want to make sure that you have something that's running already, and then, cyclically you have a certain, performance. You test it, and then you improve it over time, rather than waiting at the end of for example, pre-season to actually go into in-season. So again, very applicable, and in a plain English, it means that planning in the pre-season shouldn't be much different than the planning in-season. So you want to make sure that the performance is never, dropping too much due to, over-investing into certain methods. And also, besides, if you are further away from that I mentioned here, don't move too much from a minimum viable performance. If the team is too far away from the competitive aspects, you're never going to see certain problems emerging in a game, so you're not able to fix it. So that's one example. another visual representation. I really like the last one. Again, same thing. So, yeah, some of the coaches, not sure nowadays, but beforehand, preseason was mostly focused on, lifting the physical aspect, or quite a big chunk of the preseason spent on a physical aspect, disregarding the other components. So this is very risky, as I mentioned previously, because if this method fails, probably gonna have a failed season. So we always want to have a thread of everything, pretty much all the time. Again, this also gives us a tool or a vehicle to explore. So if you are too far away from playing 5v5 in the basketball, in the preseason, we're never going to figure out potential issues. For example, could be tactics, could be physical. And again, how this is applied to planning. We plan in iterations. So rather than having a big chunk of plan, we plan minimally as needed. And we want to make sure that we have these elements that are repeatable, particularly review. So planning, we monitor over a week or two. We do a retrospective, and then we try to repeat that all the time. So it's planning as we go. So again, if I come to a new club, I cannot immediately figure out, what to do. I start with a minimum viable program that gives me, again, minimum viable performance, also gives me a minimum viable tool, so I can actually explore the team and figure out what I need to be working on. As a head coach or as a strength conditioning coach, it works both ways. Again, different example. So we have these elements that are always reoccurring, particularly review and retrospective. So this could be, again, certain type of tests, could be a friendly match, could be performance testing, and so forth. So I'm going to use these to figure out what went wrong here, get a quick feedback, and then improve here. So again, this type of planning is more, we need to kind of be transparent about mistakes that we did, accept the mistakes, and try to fix them over the next iteration. Rather than waiting the whole season and, at the end of the season, everybody's running away to families and vacations. To do a feedback, we do it quite frequently. And there are certain techniques I'm going to show you, how can be easily implemented. So again, example of the annual plan. So rather than populating everything, we populate some of the stuff that are fixed, the kind of constraints, or the fixed poles, and we plan around those. So rather than populating everything, we just roll as we go. We plan as we go. Pretty much that's the idea of the agile planning. So this is a quote from Gerd Gigerenzer. I think he's German, actually. And I think it's very, very applicable to our domain. So when faced with significant irreducible uncertainty, the robustness of the approach is more relevant to its future performance than its optimality. It's a mouthful, but it's very simply exampled in the next slide. So imagine usually the coaches and our physical preparation coaches, we are interested in the optimal time to develop or target certain trait. For example, what's the best time to sprint? What's the best time to do anaerobic conditioning or so forth? And the research is also very aligned with this. And for example, if in a team sport scenario, when we have a long season and a game every week or things like that, we have optimal window where we can actually load the athletes with the minimal risk of athletes being fatigued or affecting the next game, right? So in the example here, when we have a game on Sunday, the best day to do a speed work might be, again, this is a match day plus 1, 2, 3. So usually match day plus 3 or match day plus 4. Usually in soccer, I don't know, in basketball, pretty much. So this is the optimal day to actually do a speed work. But imagine, you lost this game, and you come here on Wednesday and tell the coach, we need 30 minutes to do speed work. And the head coach is being a Serbian probably, and said, you know, screw your plans, we're just going to torture them with the tactics, right? So you miss this day. Or certain athletes do not show up on this day. So it's going to be, sorry, this is the one. So if this happens here, we're going to have 14 days between the speed stimuli, right? So the next time the athletes come here, they might complain they're going to have sore legs, they're going to, you know, pretty much complain, and you're going to create unnecessary stress in the system. So other example, again, rather than trying to find the optimal time, is to try to find the most robust approach. So it's pretty much defensive planning. So contingency planning. So what if I miss, or if certain athletes miss this training, you know, how can I plan? So one example here is microdosing. You're probably familiar with the concept of microdosing. So rather than having a big load, we try to microdose everything a little bit every day. Again, not perfect, but it's the most robust approach. So if the athlete misses the session, if someone misses this session, you know, next day is going to be similar elements. So we're always making sure to have a thread of everything in a session. And this is a concept we are trying to implement in the Radgeber Academy in Hungary. Microdosing every day. So rather than having a strength session on a specific day, we try to do a little bit of lifting every day. Why is this also good? Because maybe on this day the head coach is sick, and then you have an opportunity to actually to capitalize on developing, for example, certain elements. But if you haven't done this before, if you capitalize, you're going to increase the volume. You might have load-related issues. So you might have sore legs, heavy legs, and so forth. But if you have a string of everything every day, once the opportunity emerges, you can capitalize on that opportunity. And this is an example of a way of thinking, exactly as I mentioned previously. It comes from Nassim Taleb. If anyone read Black Swan or Anti-Fragile, this is something called a barbell strategy. Pretty much, again, we can learn a lot from other domains, and this is related to investing in uncertainty. So how should we invest our resources when we don't know the probabilities of success? So these are called the left side of the barbell. So low risk. Pretty much you can see that the biggest investments, again, could be methods and so forth, are equally distributed. So that's pretty much similar to this. So with this we cover the MVP, minimum viable program, minimum viable performance. We are making sure that we are not far away from a competitive performance. So we cover pretty much everything. We also, I tend to joke, so what's the main goal of the strength conditioning coach? To stay strength conditioning coach. It's Machiavellian principle, but if you're, you know, having a high risk, high reward, but it fails, you'll be out of the position, out of the club. So it's kind of defensive thinking, so just making sure that, you know, we cover all the bases, we make sure the athletes are healthy, they're coming to practices, they are doing speed work, lifting, so forth, you know, just also covering our own asses, right? Low risk, low reward. And then once the opportunity emerges, we invest in a high risk, high reward strategy. So if the things fail on the right side of the barbell, at least we are kind of protected with this. So iterative planning and the agile also gives us the rapid feedback. So with the rapid feedback, again, this is a quote from I'm going to show you with an idea from the visual management, also a big element of the agile. With the rapid feedback, we have an organization that actually learns quickly. And again, there's a big field of research of something that's called organizational learning. So not only coaches learn, the organization also learn to coordinate departments, to deal with certain setbacks and so forth. And having something that's called a visual management, again, also a big area of research, big area of books and so forth, of the visual management, I think it's very important element of creating rapid feedback. And I'm going to show you a few examples. One example of visual management is when you go to a parking lot, you have parking spots marked on the ground, right? It gives you a constraint where you need to put the car. So that's one of the examples of the visual manager. Also in the factories, if you go to, you guys are in Germany more organized than us Serbians. So if you go to a workshop in Serbia, you can see keys all over the place, right? Tools. But in some of the workshops, you have exactly kind of shadows of certain tools that needs to be there. So that's example of the visual management. We are all driving cars, right? So nowadays we have a lot of dashboards, analytics, sports science coming in, pouring the data. You know, we have tracking of the athletes all the time. And I tend to say these are tools, not truths. So similar to the dashboard in a car. So the dashboard in the car is not going to tell me how to ride. It's not going to tell me where to go, but it's going to, quickly pinpoint me with the visual indicators, areas of concern. So where should I need to pay attention to? So same thing with, again, example of the visual boarding. I think this is a hospital unit, bed allocation. And what we can do quite similar here. So for example, this is example of something called a Kanban board. If you guys have kids or you manage your own tasks, usually this is a doing, done, or to do, doing, done. So you have a visual indicator of how many tasks you're actually currently doing, how much is being left to be done, and so forth if you're managing a project. So we are also trying to implement this either on a whiteboard in a coach's room, which is problematic because you guys tend to travel and so forth. So it could be a software solution. And there are multiple of them. And here you can see immediately, so if I'm a CEO of the club, and if I go in a coach's room, I can immediately see the problematic areas. I can see which player has any issues, who's available to play, and so forth. So it's a very simple visual indicator. And here we can have, could be a medical status of the athlete, could be any training status also, can be also some type of a key indicator of performance, could be, say, acute to chronic ratio of running distance and so forth, immediately visually indicated. So once you go inside, you immediately see where is a potential issue. Again, here we have return to play column. It could be multiple columns here. Again, it could be organized in a different ways. And you immediately see coaches and the physios can immediately discuss, this guy is in a phase 1. For example, could be acute injury, needs to rest. And then we might have certain criteria of moving athlete to a next phase in a rehab. And the good thing is that it's transparent and it's visible. Usually, all the clubs have issue with head coach dealing with a physio, dealing with a strength conditioning coach. It's always you said that, you said this, unknown criteria for next level of rehab and so forth. In Australia, where I used to work for one season in Australian football, one of the criteria for moving from a phase 3 to available is that athlete needs to fulfill, I think, 7 or 14 days of unmodified training with the team. So athlete is unable to play if 7 days is unable to fulfill 7 days of unmodified training with the squad. So this visual board can be used in something that's called a daily stand-up meeting. So the coaches, the coaching staff, the physio, head coach, and strength conditioning coach can quickly meet 5 minutes in front of this type of board and immediately see, areas of concern. Maybe some of the athletes played in a reserves. This is a topic that I'm going to cover tomorrow on the Tomorrow conference. And then they immediately improve the communication between the departments. Another topic that another tool kind of that we used in this case in the Aspire Academy that I found interesting is that every few weeks, again, iterations, they have something that's called athlete reviews. So the whole coaching department gathers up and review, I won't say every athlete, but the most important athletes. So they go over what's being done over the last 3 or 4 weeks, check the test, and they collectively decide what to do next if it's a prospect player or something like that. So anyway, a lot to cover in 35 minutes. So this type of planning is not easier than the waterfall planning. It's harder. But in my opinion, it's better. And I think most of the clubs stumble on the same problems. The planning, the communication between the departments and so forth. And hopefully some of the tools that I presented here is going to stimulate your motivation to kind of try to find more about the topic. Thanks for the attention. Good time.
Thank you so much. Ja, ich bin wieder auf lauten Laden. Vielen Dank. Gibt es direkt Fragen? Möchte jemand das Mikro haben? Ist relativ leicht zu bedienen. Einfach reinsprechen. Sollte jemand lieber die Frage auf Deutsch stellen? Ich übersetze dann auch gerne auf Englisch, falls das ein Hindernis ist. Gar keine Fragen. Okay, Lan, then I'm gonna ask you one. I think you talked about this in the robust versus optimal department. Oh, ich glaube, ich habe ein Feedback, sorry. Like, there's a coach, he has a plan, you as the athletics coach, you come in, you want to do something, but he says, no, today we're gonna need to do this, because we're gonna talk with Christian about communication soon. What you learned about specifically in basketball, but also perhaps the other sports you went in, how can you communicate all that you showed us here, like into the other departments, the coach, the sporting director as well? What did you learn about this?
So if it's a transparent board, that's a big step forward, because the information is not hidden on individual Excel sheets and drop boxes and so forth. So everyone have immediate insight into the current processes and the current state. Again, it's a double edge. So we had, in Australia, we wanted to implement this semaphore system of the athletes, red, yellow, red, yellow, green, right?
Yeah, the last one you showed?
Yeah, so yeah. Which athlete is at risk? For example, that could be one of the issues. I'm not directly answering your questions, but bear with me for a second. Yeah. So the question was, should the athlete actually see this board? And in Australians being politically correct, they said, yeah, the athlete should see the board. But me being Serbian, right, we know that if the athlete see this board and see that he is at risk, red, again, one effect is going to have a brain worm. You're going to put like, why am I red? You know, what's wrong with me? Am I at the risk of injury? So you want to kind of withhold some of the information. Also, it's going to give them rationale to trying to find an English word. If the athlete has a bad performance, you might say, yeah, but I was at the risk, so I didn't play as well.
Okay.
So it's not a simple solution. It's a step forward, but it's always this tug of war. Again, depends who you're dealing with, what type of culture you have at the club. And coming back to your question, this daily stand-up meeting is the very, very short meeting that pretty much all the representatives of the department need to be there. So it's very short, sharp, and it's quickly like, what have been done, what's going to be done today, and then they can quickly adjust. So if the physio did a screening in the morning of a certain athlete, he might update it in a software, and it's going to show up as a red, could be a special note, right? And then they can gather up and say, okay, this morning this guy complained, lack of sleep for the last 3 days or something like that. Yeah. Just keep it in mind. So not necessarily you need to, rethink the whole training or readapt, but it's there. It's like in a car. Sometimes, you have a oil light, and you're like, fuck it, I'm gonna make it, So it's in this case, it's a known risk. Then everybody agrees we're gonna take that risk. So we might say important game, but the key player complained about the hamstring. So it's documented. It's also from a legal perspective important, I think. So the risk is being documented in a legal document. Said, physio said he is at risk, so the physio is, he covers his ass, right?
Yeah.
No one's gonna, no one's gonna pursue him. Yeah. So it's transparent, and then we say, okay, we know he is at risk, but we have an important game. Do you guys agree that we take the risk? So again, I think this type of visual management improves communication. So I guess
totally,
answers your question.
I thank you. Das war wahrscheinlich viel Input, vielleicht auch, ich habe schon gesehen, da wurden, glaube ich, ein paar Bilder gemacht. Ihr seht, dass da eine Kamera steht. Wer sich das alles nochmal, die Charts vom Laden oder auch seinen ganzen Vortrag nochmal anhören möchte, wird alles von der VBG bereitgestellt. Also wenn irgendwas offen geblieben ist, ihr könnt es euch alles nochmal nachgucken. Laden, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.